With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
All righty. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Motor Minds podcast. I am your host, Patrick McCoy, a.k.a. Cruiser Pat, as you may know me on Instagram. And today, for our first ever guest, we are joined by Jennifer O'Neill. So, Jennifer, thanks for being here today with us.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this, and I really, really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So this is something, starting the podcast, I was thinking like, okay, we want to talk to influencers, we want to talk to people who are obsessed with cars, but, the other part of it is mental health. And I'm not a therapist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. So who can we talk to get a little bit more about that? And I've heard about Jennifer and seen some of her videos online. She does a lot of great stuff around narcissism and well-being and all around just mental health. So I figured there's nobody better to ask than Mrs. O'Neill here. So Jennifer, tell me, how did you get started? So you're a therapist, right?
Yeah, I am I'm licensed in several different states. So in Texas, I am an LCSW, and in Michigan, I'm an LMSW. I'm licensed in some other states. So yeah, essentially I'm a psychotherapist. So I see people and help them figure out how to help their life move forward.
Very good. So you have all the acronyms that go with your name that mean that you can talk to people about mental health, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Love it. Lovely. So how did you get started with mental health? Is it something that you've always been passionate about? You've been doing it for over 25 years. Before mental health got cool, quote unquote. So how did you get into it?
I was always drawn to it. I always joke and say, as a kid, I'm old. So the original Bob Newhart show, maybe some people don't even know who Bob Newhart is, but anyway, the original show back way in the 70s, he was a psychologist. And so I watched that show when I was a kid, and I really remember distinctly thinking like, I would love that job. Like it really appealed to me. I was always just kind of temperamentally and who I am drawn to listening to people, figuring things out in my head, wondering about people, wondering about what made people tick. And I could go into a lot more detail, but essentially it was just, I was always naturally drawn to it. So over time and the way my life evolved, I always wanted to be a therapist. I took a little bit of a circuitous route. Initially, I worked for county mental health, but finally got there to become a therapist. And yeah, I've been doing it for over 25 years, and I still just love it. I feel like it's very consistent with who I am.
That's awesome. It's cool to see somebody who's been doing it for so long. Mental health is, I don't want to say it's a fad or anything like that. It's something that's very important, but you've seen kind of the blossoming of mental health in our society over the past few years. And I think it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. But can you talk a little bit about how you've seen it change in the course of your career and how, society and people are accepting it in our culture now?
Gosh, that's a big question. But yes, I think that, oh my gosh, I think at the core of it, people have always been drawn to therapy because I think that the core idea of therapy is I get to have somebody who really sees me and understands me and can help me understand myself.
Right.
So I do think that the acceptance of people going to therapy, the acceptance of people talking about their issues clearly has come like light years from when I first started in this field. And I love these days, like when I see kids and teens, like I love it because they're like, everybody's talking about their therapist. They're
Right,
like,
right.
oh, my therapist said this. My therapist said, no,
My
it's like,
therapist is my best friend, man. Like,
we hope not that, but,
right.
but yeah, it's like, it's the competition for whose therapist said what. So I love that kids today and teens have really incorporated this idea of it is normal to see a therapist.
Right.
And I have to sometimes explain it to the adults, the parents, that like, yeah, no, the kids aren't embarrassed about seeing a therapist. Like,
Right. It's
really
not
good with
it's
it.
not a shrink anymore, you're not sitting in the
Yeah,
age old, like, what is that? The Ottoman style sofa
yeah,
and doing all that stuff.
yeah.
It's a different day and age. But that was going to be my next question. So you're seeing that, parents and whatnot are becoming more accepting of their kids
Oh,
talking about mental health
oh,
and going to see therapists and whatnot, right?
yeah. And I love that people these days are so familiar and so comfortable with talking about the concepts and just talking about self-growth. And yeah, it's a wonderful evolution. It has some pitfalls. I think sometimes people think they understand things that they don't. And so there's
Right.
some there, but that's okay.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, I mean, talk about what you do in your work. Is there something that you generally like working on more? I know that you have a series on narcissism that's on YouTube, and you also talk about a lot of other things. Is there anything that you say that you're like an expert at, or anything that really just gets your juices flowing on, man, this is why I became a therapist?
Oh gosh, I always find this question hard because there's so many things that sort of interest me. So yes, I will say this, the narcissism is something I have really started to evolve in the last few years, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of tripped into it, just going to trainings and really seeing it show up a lot in my practice with clients who have a narcissist in their life. And so I just started learning more and seeing it show up more and starting to understand the like profound impact on people. And so that got my juices going. And as I started to work more with clients around it and understanding how little people really understand what narcissism truly is,
Right.
even other therapists, I started to develop a passion of like, I really need to help people understand this.
That's cool.
So that has become sort of a more recent iteration of something I've really delved more deeply into. But in general, I just love the job of therapy. I really love being present in the room with somebody. For me, it's like there's puzzle pieces that are kind of falling down, right?
Right.
And they fit together. And that moment when something really clicks and you can see something really clearly, and then you can help the client kind of see that, is like the best feeling in the world. It reminds me of when performers talk about being on stage, and like
Right.
there's nothing like that feeling, right? So for me, I get all these drops of that in the therapy experience with somebody, and just helping them move through all of the morass of things going on underneath the surface. And I also really like helping give people concrete skills for like, hey, if you're feeling really anxious, I've got some concrete skills for that. And so getting to see people have some immediate relief and immediate movement and shifts, but also for people over time being a part of somebody's journey and tapestry. And I don't mean to sound cliche because it sounds cliche,
Well,
but it honestly is like such an honor. Like when I get to walk that journey with somebody and I'm part of that evolution piece for them,
right.
like there's just, I can't imagine any other job that would have that experience with it.
Well,
It's
that I've never thought about it that way. That's a really cool way to think about it. I mean, therapists, especially in 2023,
yeah,
like you're part of the pivotal parts of people's lives. A lot of people only
yeah,
start coming to you whenever they're in crisis or they're going through a tough time that, hey, man, I've been able to figure this stuff out my whole life, but now I feel like I need to talk to somebody. I'm in an uncharted space in my life and I need somebody to talk to. So that's super cool. I also think it's really cool that with therapists and whatnot, like you have narcissism is something that you've kind of lashed onto and said, this is cool for me. And this is what I kind of, a little bit of my niche, but of course you do a little bit of everything else. It's kind of like car obsession where, I'm a Land Cruiser guy and I love all cars, right? But I really know Land Cruisers. I could go through Land Cruisers and make videos on them all that I wanted to. But it's cool to see that correlation there between just how people's minds work. So tell me, let's kind of shift gears a little bit, for lack of a better term, it's kind of corny, but talking about car obsession. Of course, this is the Motor Minds podcast. We want to talk a little bit about cars and mental health and whatnot. So, I mean, one of the main things is car obsession. Like for me, I've been obsessed with cars since I was a little kid, and I know a lot of people out there have been the same way. Is obsession, and I know there's an obsession compulsive disorder, but is obsession in the traditional sense of being obsessed with cars or whatever it may be, is that something that you see pretty often?
So this is such an interesting idea and concept and language. I'm a big believer that language is important, right? Language carries meaning and all of that. And so I get a little bit tripped up with the idea of obsession, because really the definition of obsession moves more into something that is the mind can't get off of it. And so it is really taking up a lot of your energy and mental space. And usually it involves anxiety. Like my mind is just going and going and going on this thing. But we also, it's a common use of the language. People say like, I'm so obsessed with that. I'm so obsessed, right? So I get it that for people, there is this idea of obsession. I would use the language, I would call it passion.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I would call it really getting involved in something that pulls you in and that you love. And so, yes, I mean, I deal with that all the time. Obviously people aren't showing up in my office all the time, like the car is there.
Right. No, absolutely.
But people have passions. People get very sort of obsessed, we'll use that word, with both negative and positive. And I think if we want to talk about people who have a real passion for cars, and that's a big part of their life, we can talk about how that manifests in ways that are passion, that are really good for them. And then when does it step over the line into something that's pulling me down into a space where it's causing problems in my life? And I think that shows up for people a lot in a lot of different ways, right? And so when we talk about a passion or something that takes your time, and a little bit of a different piece on that is a lot of what I do with clients is I want them to understand who they are, and I want them to lean into that. And so for me, if somebody can give themselves permission to lean into a passion in a helpful and a healthy way, like I am all about that. I'm like, go do your thing, like lean into that, because so many people are afraid to give themselves permission to do that. So it's kind of multi-layered here, but
definitely very cool. So you're telling me that cars can be a good thing, huh?
Cars
they don't have to be all bad, right? It's not all pulling money out of your pocket to modify and all that stuff. I can go home and tell my wife, this is for my mental health. This is good for me, right?
Sure, fine, go for it, do it.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that. And again, the difference in obsession and passion or enthusiasm, right? Because, for me, it's not, and I know a lot of people, it's not an obsession to where it's wreaking havoc on my day-to-day life or causing me anxiety. It's quite the opposite. It's something that, whenever I do want a little bit of time away, I can go out in the garage and tinker, or if I have a free moment at work, or if I just need to take a break from what I'm doing, I go and look at, bring a trailer or look at cars online or read the latest articles or something like that. But yeah, I love that. It's for me, it's not all a bad thing, and it's good to hear from somebody, hey, that's not all bad, and maybe it is something that's good for your mental health, and you can keep doing it without bad. But on the other end of what you're saying, talk about when a passion or enthusiasm for something can get to the unhealthy side of things, because that's a lot of things that people talk about is with car enthusiasm and whatnot. There's a lot of ways that it can get out of hand, overspending, driving recklessly on all that. But talk about, where you can kind of throw that red flag of like, hey, maybe it is starting to turn into something maybe a little unhealthy.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different layers on that. And I listened to your introductory podcast where you talked a bit about like how you got pulled in and how cars have helped you, right? And so, yeah, we can definitely talk out of both sides of our mouth about this, about how great that is to find a way to sort of channel and use cars as a way to like help myself feel better and something that I really love and something I can indulge in. And so I think, look, this is tricky business because I think where it can start to go wrong, right, is number one, if you're just indulging too much. So it starts to wreak havoc in your life financially, or it's pulling you away from the people in your life in ways that are leaving them feeling like they don't matter. And so I think for car enthusiasts, that's a hard needle to thread.
Absolutely.
Really
sometimes those new wheels just look a lot better than buying that pack of diapers. I don't know, man.
It's like,
a little more sexy.
It's just going to take me one more hour and you're 6 hours later, right?
You just triggered my wife, I can tell.
Yeah, right. So there's a really hard balance here to kind of walk about how do I really lean into my passion and be who I am. And like, if I'm creating something and I'm writing, I love doing that, right? And I'll get lost in that though. It's like come up for air 5 hours later and it's like, right. So I think anything like we have passion for, it's the great thing about we lose time doing it, but that's also the problem. We lose time doing it.
Right.
So I think anytime you start to see yourself getting pulled into it so much that it's starting to take away from your life in good way, like money, time, energy, you're not going to work, you're not showing up for people who care about you, that's a red flag. And when we talk about true obsession, if you really do have some obsessive qualities, I mean, this is kind of tricky, dicey area and potentially dangerous for you, because I can only imagine the minutia you can obsess on about cars and how intense that they can get. I think the other place that it becomes important, and this kind of speaks to like your intro of how cars are important to you, is if you are using something as an escape, not just as a healthy way to cope with emotions, but if you are really avoiding things in a way that are causing you problems, I just don't want to deal with that. I'm going to just shut it out. I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to focus on this instead. Then that can also get to be problematic for people, right?
Definitely. And I mean, that's something, for somebody who deals with a little bit of anxiety and depression, sometimes it is easy to go and find that thing that you just love doing and give you that dopamine hit whenever you're feeling a little bit down and out, and you can just get lost in it. But oftentimes it makes you feel worse at the end of the day because you realize you didn't get what you need to get done. And now, the cycle continues. Super interesting. And another thing with car obsession, and this is something that spoke to me from a book that I read a little while back, and I'm blanking on the name right now. It is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks, there's a brief section of the book where he talks about how some people that have anxiety and living outside of the moment and whatnot, they love to get into things like motorcycle riding or jumping out of airplanes or things that put them in a situation to where your mind can only be in that moment, right? So for me, a lot of times most of what I like to use my car is, tinkering, and I love to go off-roading and, putting the truck in sometimes questionable positions. And I kind of equate that to, being in that mindset. But the way I also read it is, it can be pretty dangerous, if you're looking for that hit for speed and you're doing 180 miles an hour on a motorbike down the highway, that can't be safe for you or anybody else. Is there anything there that speaks to you? Do you see that often of people that maybe have mental health issues that try to find that one thing that hones them in, and locks in?
Boy, my brain is going 10 different directions because there was so much in what you just said. Like that has so many layers to it. So the dopamine hit really popped for me because I think that boy, and I want to, without going into a whole lecture, I'm trying to go like, how do I keep this from being an hour long?
It's my podcast. We don't have a time limit. So,
look, I think there's these parts of us that show up, right, that act to try to get us out of uncomfortable things. So try to get us out of distress, that try to get us
Right.
out of anxiety, that try to get us out of depression. And there's different strategies it can use. But dopamine hits is certainly one of them, right? And that is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
I mean, I'm hesitant to always, there are some things that are black and white, but dopamine hits, it's not a bad thing to go get a dopamine hit, right? We want to feel good. We want that to be a positive experience. But obviously we know that can go badly awry if somebody's, we're getting dopamine hits from things that are destructive, that, like drugs that are causing us problems, or
Right.
Dangerous, destructive behaviors that are giving us dopamine hits but are causing all kinds of havoc for our life. So there's a line here around, there's nothing wrong with going out and getting dopamine hits and pushing the line a little bit and being in the moment and doing things that fully involve you in life and get you pulled out of your head, right? So I would not be opposed to that. I think, like anything, when you start pushing it too far, you talk about, I'm doing things that are destructive or dangerous for me or other people. Then you have to look at how hard that part that's trying to protect you is pushing you to avoid things you don't want to deal with. And that's where it gets to be really problematic for people is, as human beings, we are hardwired to try to get away from discomfort and distress and anxiety and fear. Like, we're kind of hardwired to run. And, in so many ways, being content in life, being mentally healthy in life is very counterintuitive. Right. Because what it actually involves is not the escape. It involves leaning into being present with hard things.
Right.
And so how are you using the dopamine hit? How are you using the thing where you're on the raw edge, right? And I also think for some people who are probably drawn to this, especially if they're drawn sensory seeking, high stimulation, we can have a whole other conversation about other things like temperament and sensory seeking stuff and amygdala. And if somebody needs higher levels of stimulation, right, to feel awake. And so there's all kinds of ways that people use that. But again, that gets into
so it's a rabbit hole.
Long lecture on psychology.
Exactly. Yeah. If you need that lecture or something, you're gonna have to pay her for it. Call her up and get with Resilient Life Therapy.
Yeah, that's probably more than we want to get into.
Exactly.
But in terms of what we're talking about today, that there's a fine line, because I think depression and anxiety, part of what becomes very important, the antidote for that is being in life.
Right.
And doing things you love and being who you are and leaning into that.
Right. So
I think for people who are wondering, I think you have to be paying attention to how you're using it. Gotcha. And what's the feeling you're chasing? What is the feeling you're trying to escape? So I always want my clients to be aware of how those two things are interacting with each other. What are you seeking, and what are you seeking to escape?
Yeah.
And I just ask people, eyes wide open, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's when that's when therapy sometimes gets a little, you're like, oh man, here we are. I got to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the tough parts. Nobody said it was going to be easy though. So
yeah, we're good at ferreting those things out. That's our job.
Exactly. And so, with that, we talk about how it can be healthy and how we can lean into it, and are there any like coping mechanisms that you kind of start with people if they're going through a tough time? With whatever it may be, depression, anxiety, whatever it is, are there general coping mechanisms that you usually start with?
Oh, absolutely. I always want to, and often in the first session, have somebody understand a concrete thing they can do, a technique, a skill that they can take away, that they can immediately sort of use. And usually what I'm trying to ask them to do is to, instead of just trying to escape the thing, like, how can you start to learn how to tolerate it? And there's different techniques and activities for different things. But, you know, I mean, I'm a big believer in taking small, doable actions, right? And yeah, we want to help people, though. I mean, it's good to look at things and understand all the stuff that's popping, but people also need active skills and techniques that they can use when they're having a panic attack. Like, we got to have people be able to understand that they don't have to be overrun by anxiety or depression, because God, they're painful and they are really, really difficult.
Right.
So yeah, I always want to help people with some of those skills.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not always viable for you to go and hop in the car immediately or go and work on the car to get away from it. I mean, there are things that, I mean, that's why I advocate for therapy, is to learn those coping skills and be able to, you know, whenever the therapist isn't around and whenever the car isn't around, what are you going to do when it's just you and your thoughts? And I know that for a lot of people, that could be a scary place.
Well, and we also want the experience of the car to be something that helps your life grow and feel really good, and not just have it be an escape, right? And so the more you feel like you can manage and like you're okay if the anxious thing happens, you know, it allows you the freedom of not having to use the car in that way, right?
Right. Well, it's kind of similar to what you were talking about earlier, of whenever it crosses over from healthy to unhealthy, it's almost akin to alcohol or drugs. It's just like, you know, if you have a drink once or twice a night, then, you know, that's not a huge issue. You're using it to, you know, feel better and whatnot. But whenever it crosses over into alcoholism, or it's starting to affect the other people around you, then it may be an issue. Same with cars. You know, if you are, go ahead.
You don't want your car to be attached and associated, you know, overly much with like anxiety and sort of or depression and sort of this bad state of being, because then, you know, maybe not, I don't know if people experience in this way, but like it starts to become associated with kind of this not a great feeling, right?
Definitely. No, absolutely. Well, before we get off, I want to, you know, I like to ask at least one car question and hear about people's experiences with cars. So do you have any specific cars in your memory or anything that sticks out to you that just an experience with cars that sometimes you think about, or anything like that?
I'll say two things. I hate, and I hesitate to say this on this podcast, but I'm actually not a car person, right? I'm not super passionate about cars, but was it 2016 when the latest iteration of the Mazda Miata came out?
Oh yeah, the fifth,
I instantly fell in love with it, right? But I was living in Michigan at the time. But anyway, I moved to Texas, gosh, about a year and a half ago, and I finally let myself get one.
Really?
Yeah, like I love
man.
it so much.
That's
Love
funny.
it.
So in the car community, there's a joke that goes around that the answer is always Miata, because the Mazda Miata is like the best car at doing just what it does. It handles super well. They literally have racing series designed around them. Mazda makes a killing off them, and even the early 90s ones are still super popular today. So to hear that you drive a Mazda Miata is wonderful. And if I may add, this isn't offensive, but you suit a Mazda Miata so well. It makes me so happy that you drive one.
I'm so happy too. Yeah, it's my little soul sister, right? Like she is my little soulmate, my little Mazda Miata.
What color is it?
Blue.
It's blue. Ooh.
To be honest, and this is so cliche, especially because I'm, 59, but like I felt like a midlife crisis. I really wanted that cherry red, because
man.
Like normally I would be like, but in your 50s, like, no, you gotta calm down.
No, but the Mazda's red is so good as well. And they use it on all of their cars because it's so deep and rich and whatnot. So their blue is good too. Don't get me wrong, but
so the blue is what ended up working out, which I love. I'm very happy with it, but I love that. And then oddly enough, my very first car when I was 16 was also blue. It had actually been my grandmother's car, and it was a Ford Mustang, a 72 fastback, and also blue.
So you say you're not a car person, but you have two just quintessential lovely vehicles. Like a 72 fastback is amazing.
here's the thing.
Okay.
I had no idea what I had.
Fair.
It was
fair.
like, it was my grandma's car, and then my brother drove it, and then I got it, and I loved it, and I called it Dave. Dave was its name.
Dave.
And we had a great time in Dave, but I had no idea what I had, right?
Oh
And,
my gosh.
so I was getting ready to move to California. I lived there for a long time. So sold Dave, sold him to a guy named Dave. This is at Texas A&M. And so shortly after selling Dave to Dave, I had Dave by that time, 16 to 22 probably.
Okay.
So for a while, but anyway, enough to be kind of sad about selling Dave.
Oh, absolutely.
But then went to, if people are familiar with Texas A&M, used to have what was called Bonfire, which was this huge thing.
Oh, yeah.
every year, which was huge bonfire. So went to Bonfire and saw Dave walking around with a 12-pack beer carton, like on his head as a.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, I hope you're not driving Dave tonight.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. The blue Mustang got sold to a dude named Dave, and its name was Dave. I love that. I love that. Do you remember anything about the car? Was it the V8 or anything like that, or?
Oh gosh, I couldn't even begin to tell you. I would, and I
That's
know.
fair. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's funny. I'm pushing it now.
16-year-old girl that got like my grandma's car. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, that just made my day to know that Jennifer O'Neill, I mean, look at how well put together she is with all of her stuff in the background and all of that, that she drives a Mazda Miata. It's always the answer. Even the therapist drives one. You should drive one.
Top down with the top down.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jennifer, you've been an awesome guest, and honestly, my first guest ever, and this has been amazing. So thank you so much for joining me here today. And is there anything that you want to plug or talk about? I know you do a little bit of a YouTube series. Anything you want to plug for yourself?
Yeah. And, just if people are curious, they can either go to my website, which is resilientlifetherapy.com, or I do have a YouTube channel, which is, I don't know.
It's pretty awesome.
Well, I think it's Resilient Life. Anyway, if you go to my website, the link for the YouTube channel is there. And I do have a lot of videos. There's a lot of videos on narcissism. I actually have a guide out, Surviving the Narcissist, that really is helpful for people who have a narcissist in their life, because it really helps you go into what narcissism is, what the heck's going on. But I also talk about how you can deal with those dynamics. And I have exercises for people in there. We talk about what healthy boundaries looks like. So yeah, I would really recommend people check that out if they're dealing with narcissism. But there are I put other videos up on my YouTube channel too. And I'm just so thrilled to be your first guest. I'm so thrilled. I love what you're doing here. I love it. I think it is such a clever and perfect intersection for so many people. I'm so thrilled that you included me as part of this. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. And everybody, we'll look to see you next week. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast for Motor Minds. And again, check out the Instagram. I'll be posting stuff in between now and then there. But again, thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, everybody, for listening. See you next week.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.